By the time the analysts finished reviewing the documents, the room had gone completely silent. If the pages were real, they described something the United States had feared for years: a nuclear breakthrough, new warhead designs, delivery systems, production facilities hidden deep inside Soviet territory. It meant the balance of power during the Cold War had just shifted, and the information had come from a single man, a man no one had ever heard of before. For weeks, the documents moved quietly through the secure corridors of the Central Intelligence Agency. Experts studied every diagram. Physicists examined the calculations. Satellite analysts compared the locations. At first glance, everything looked authentic. Too authentic, but something about the source didn't make sense. Because the man who delivered these secrets wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a spy. He wasn't even trained in intelligence work. He was just a quiet, middle-aged businessman who claimed he had access to the Soviet Union's most dangerous military program. And somehow, the CIA believed him. His name was Yuri. At least, that was the name he gave them. He appeared in the early 1970s, walking into a U.S. diplomatic office in Europe with a small briefcase and a story that sounded impossible. He claimed he had connections inside the Soviet military. More specifically, inside their nuclear weapons program. According to him, high-ranking officials were willing to sell classified information, but they wouldn't deal with Americans directly. They trusted only one man, him. On paper, Yuri looked ordinary. No military background, no scientific training, just a trader who moved goods between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. Someone who crossed borders often, someone who knew people, and someone who, according to his story, had stumbled into a network of desperate Soviet officials willing to sell secrets for money. The Cold War was still in full force at the time. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a silent competition. Not just armies, not just missiles, information. Who had the better technology? Who had the more advanced weapons? Who could strike first? So when Yuri quietly offered nuclear documents, the CIA did what intelligence agencies always do when faced with a risk like this. They listened. The first meeting was cautious. A small room, 2 CIA officers. One translator. Yuri placed a thin folder on the table. Inside were technical drawings, warhead schematics, material specifications, production estimates. The officers didn't react, but they knew immediately these documents were not random. They looked convincing. Yuri explained that he could get more, much more. But information like this wasn't cheap. His contacts inside the Soviet system were taking enormous risks. If they were discovered, they would disappear into prisons. Or worse. The officers told him they would review the material. Days later, the analysts finished their initial assessment. The designs were plausible. The terminology matched Soviet military language. The engineering details made sense. Nothing jumped out as fake. That was enough to move forward. The CIA arranged another meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different. Yuri arrived calm, confident. He knew they were interested. The agency asked him a simple question. How much information could he really provide? Yuri leaned back and smiled. Everything. Missile yields, testing results, factory locations, even future weapon plans. He said his contacts were desperate for money. The Soviet system was cracking under pressure, and corruption was everywhere. The agency made a decision. They would pay him. Carefully, slowly, but the flow of information began. New documents arrived every few weeks, sometimes diagrams, sometimes full technical reports, and each delivery raised the stakes. Inside CIA headquarters, analysts built entire threat models based on Yuri's information. They updated nuclear defense projections. They estimated Soviet weapon capacity. All based on what this one man was selling them. But intelligence work is never simple, because the more valuable a source becomes, the more dangerous they are. Soon, a small group inside the agency began asking quiet questions. Who exactly were Yuri's contacts? Why would Soviet nuclear scientists trust a random businessman? Why were the documents always slightly incomplete, just enough to be useful, never enough to verify completely? Still, the information kept coming, and the agency kept paying. Over the next 2 years, Yuri collected hundreds of thousands of dollars. Meetings happened in hotel rooms, train stations, dim cafes across Europe. The exchanges were always the same: a briefcase, a handshake, a stack of papers. Then, one night, something changed. During a routine analysis session, a young nuclear engineer noticed a detail buried in one of the documents: a measurement. It looked correct at first, but when he recalculated the physics behind it, the numbers didn't work. Not slightly wrong, impossible. At first he assumed it was a translation mistake, but then he checked another document, then another. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Small technical errors, tiny inconsistencies, individually harmless, together devastating. If the calculations were wrong, the warhead design described in the documents couldn't actually function, which meant one of two things. Either the Soviet Union had made catastrophic engineering mistakes, or someone had carefully created fake nuclear plans. The engineer brought his concerns to his supervisor. The documents were reviewed again. Then again, more experts were called in, and the deeper they looked, the worse it got. The diagrams looked perfect. The terminology was flawless, but the physics was broken. Every single document Yuri had delivered contained the same hidden flaw. Enough realism to fool most analysts, but just enough error to collapse under deeper scientific scrutiny. The room went quiet, because suddenly the question wasn't about the documents. It was about Yuri. Had he been fooled? Or had he fooled them? The CIA arranged another meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different. The officers didn't smile. Yuri walked into the room carrying another briefcase, another delivery. But instead of opening it, one officer slid a folder across the table. Inside were marked up copies of his previous documents, highlighted errors, broken calculations, impossible reactor outputs. The officer asked him a single question: "Where did you really get these?" For the first time, Yuri hesitated, just for a moment. Then he laughed. Not nervous, not defensive, just amused. He leaned back in his chair and calmly admitted the truth. There were no Soviet scientists, no secret network, no nuclear contacts. He had created the entire story. Every document, every diagram, every report, all fake. The officers stared at him, because the level of detail in those documents was extraordinary. Yuri shrugged. He had spent months studying publicly available nuclear research, old academic papers, declassified reports, physics textbooks. Then he combined real knowledge with invented details, enough truth to make the story believable, enough errors to avoid accidentally creating real weapon designs. The CIA had paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars for nuclear secrets, but the only real thing he had sold them was confidence. The officers demanded to know why. Why take such a risk? Why run a con against one of the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world? Yuri gave a simple answer: because they wanted to believe it. During the Cold War, both sides were obsessed with the other's capabilities. Every rumor, every secret, every whisper of a new weapon. Fear made people move fast, and when fear moves faster than verification, mistakes happen. The CIA cut contact immediately. The payments stopped. The documents were locked away. Officially, the operation was quietly buried. No public reports, no major investigations. Just a classified lesson passed through intelligence circles. But the story spread quietly among analysts. Not as a scandal, as a warning. Because the man who sold fake nuclear secrets to the CIA didn't hack their systems. He didn't infiltrate their headquarters. He didn't even pretend to be a scientist. He simply understood something most people overlook. The most powerful intelligence agencies in the world are still run by human beings. And humans want answers, even when the answers aren't real. Yuri disappeared from the intelligence world as quietly as he entered it. No arrests, no trials, no headlines. Just a ghost who walked into the Cold War, sold nuclear secrets that never existed, and walked away. And somewhere inside CIA archives, those documents still exist, perfectly detailed, technically convincing, completely useless, proof that one ordinary man managed to outplay an intelligence superpower. Not with weapons, not with spies, but with paper, patience, and the one thing every intelligence agency fears the most: a lie that looks exactly like the truth.